Our topic of today's Strategic Leadership Engagement Series presentation, Managing in the Hybrid Cloud. Having completed the three 30-minute presentations from the vendor organizations, we're going to move into a discussion period. This will allow the hoteliers in the audience to ask questions and to discuss various issues related to this topic with our vendor representatives. So we're going to get right into the discussion. I'll remind everyone in attendance to please use a microphone when they have a question. And ladies and gentlemen in the audience, questions? Vineet, please.
So I'll start by talking about, and it's more of a discussion which I'm hoping you guys can talk about, is the cloud as it relates to globalization. Okay, so there's two aspects to it. One is most of our companies are management companies. They are partially owner-operators, but primarily management companies. So the challenges we see as we globalize is twofold. One is owners are reluctant to go into the cloud, and sometimes the cost-benefit is not enough because they feel they are going to lose something, right? So that's the first piece, whether it's North American, European, Middle Eastern, or Asian. The second issue we're seeing is, especially in the Middle East and Asia, there's just a total reluctance of going into the cloud because of lack of understanding. So I wanted to more get your views, because you guys must be seeing this as you go out more and more, is how are you dealing with this? Because we definitely have quite a bit of a pushback on both these pieces. And the financial benefits are just not seen as enough.
Who would like to take that question first? Frank? Well, let's let Frank, and then we'll pick it up with Bill. Frank, go ahead.
Great. So Vineet, it's a great question. I think ultimately, what we're seeing is there's certainly regional clusters of cloud of taking properties without crossing sort of certain types of geographical boundaries, so that they have a little bit more of a comfort level of owning their data and their data staying within a certain jurisdiction. The other thing we're certainly seeing is, from a cost-benefit perspective, you're right, sometimes that is just not enough. But when they start to see that it matters to their guests in terms of the guest experience, the things that can now be achieved potentially for them by taking some aspects of their operational systems to the cloud, I think that's where it starts to become not a question of if, it's sort of when, and what they don't want to lose out on is the opportunities for their hotels to be seen as really premier guest experiences, and if there's a limiting factor around systems where they're seeing maybe some of their contemporaries in other properties able to achieve some things that they simply can't do because of some of the limitations that in somewhat have been self-imposed, I think that's where it will start to change. So it does, I believe that, the trend is there. It's inevitable. It's just a matter of, it's a comfort level. There are, like we said, sometimes it's a cultural thing. Sometimes it's, we all have, sometimes it's an age thing. We're not as comfortable sharing some information as some of the younger people are. And I think as we move along, we start to realize that as long as the security is properly in place and there's good governance, that there really isn't that risk that that they might fear in terms of their data being somewhere where they no longer have control or own it per se.
Thank you. Bill, did you have some comments?
I do, and I think my first observation is the fact that from a global perspective, we're realizing that you can't go global cloud. There are just certain areas that are still prohibitive with respect to connectivity. From a cost to return, I mean, I agree. It's why I mixed kind of cloud with accounting centralization. I was at an owners conference and they had a panel, and the guy said, so what are you going to take on first? Renovations, da-da-da. And the guy said, whatever I have the biggest return on. So I think that's always. Culturally, I think we run into issues too. I mean, there's some cultures that they're hiring a lot of family members. We know that in the Asian culture, they're running 3 times the number of accountants that are on the ground than we do here in the U.S. So there are barriers to get over, no doubt. I still think from a perspective of process and strength and your all's perspective, cloud's the way to go.
Rick?
Yeah, I would just say, and Charlie, you can add to this, but I think our experience has been part of what Frank said, that some of it is that they've come to see what they're not going to be able to take advantage of, that their competitors or peers are, especially with this mobility and what it allows people to do. A general manager really overseeing 2 or 3 properties now with that capability where they couldn't before, and so they start to see what they're missing, and that's been a part of it. We have, though, experienced exactly what you're talking about. There's one country in particular that as we made our first attempt in there, you could just feel the resistance. And so our approach has been take a pilot property, really do our homework, go in there and make that seamless, and then through that experience win that one over and then let them help influence the others. But no question, culturally and geographically, we've seen those challenges. And then just from a performance standpoint, besides distributing where the cloud source is, we've also used Akamai services to just help alleviate any sort of response time issues. And we have places in Australia that I think get better service than places in the States. So I think there's a combination of things. Charlie,
Vineet-
did you have something else?
No,
Vineet, does your question suggest that you'd like vendors to do a better job putting together an ROI case?
Well, yeah, 2 things. One is, give CIOs or other people in the hotel on the client side the better ability to sell it, right? And it can't be based on technology. And second is, I believe it has to be rolled in with the process piece. It can't be about technology. At the end of the day, technology really is not front and center for most hoteliers, right? So that's the challenge is from the vendor community is to give enough tools or enough information on how can it be sold by management company. That's what I think the biggest barrier is, right?
Vendors, can you do a better job of giving Vineet the ammunition he needs?
So I would say we began our experience outside of North America about 4 years ago, and it was one of the projects that I had come on board to help with. And I think a lot of what we've seen is really the same we saw here. It takes those first pioneers, so to speak, to show the rest of their counterparts the benefits. One of the things that's different for us is really being able to localize on that central platform and having awareness of the business differences ahead of time and really being able to help the local hotelier understand that, yes, we understand the challenges that are different, particularly with an American company going into the UK or Australia. There are just some very different experiences that natively we're not aware of, but we've been able to work through and really do that process that we do, very similar to what we do here, and be very cognizant of that fear, again, that we may not understand all that they need, and also be able to listen. We've certainly run into trouble, and we've been able to turn it around and make changes in order to accommodate some local things that we hadn't accounted for. But you definitely have to focus on being able to turn around those challenges as quickly as you can.
Are we good? Then let's go over to Scott. You appeared to have a question, Scott.
Yeah, this is really a follow-up because it strikes me that part of this challenge is management companies and ownership groups want to have all their hotels on the same product. So to a great extent, if you're selling to individual hotels, if you're selling to brands like us, you're selling to the wrong audience. It's very, very hard for me if a management group has 3 hotels in my brand, 3 hotels in your brand, 3 hotels in your brand, it's very, very hard for me to convince them to do something different with the 3 hotels that are in my brand than they're doing with the other 6 hotels. So to a great extent, it seems to me that you should kind of be targeting those organizations even more so than independent hotels. The other thing that occurs to me about the and this goes to your point about selling them on the capability. I think the challenge on selling them on the capability is the capability is about the architecture and currency of the product, not so much about the fact that it's a cloud solution. It happens to be a cloud solution. But what they'll get out of the capability is, yes, I want to be able to do all those things, but that isn't going to be a natural leap to, yes, I'm happy to have it all happen in the cloud. I'd like to do all those things, but I still want the server in my data center. I still want to exercise control. I just want all those things. So that's the challenge with selling it on the basis of the feature. I really do think in the end, you have to get to, you can't divorce the argument from the economic benefit, the economic model, the simplicity, the ease of operation, which I actually find is the most attractive thing when I talk to my members about it. They really want to get out of the business of buying and operating technology, so they're quite open to the idea.
Scott, I'm thinking of the SkyTouch presentation and the point that was made about always on. You're dealing similar hotel types between Best Western and Choice, the users of part of the client base of SkyTouch. Do you detect an interest amongst the general managers you come in contact with, the owners, about having access anywhere, anytime? Is there a different type of GM emerging just as a different type of client emerging?
Absolutely, and we hear it from our members all the time. And as a general rule, and I guess it's not a surprise, the younger the owner operator is, the more you hear it, just because they've grown up in that environment where they can access everything, and so we hear it. But it isn't a given, I think, that they will select a cloud solution for those capabilities. What they will do is they will drive their current product vendor to deliver those capabilities to them. In the absence of a better argument about the cloud model, what they will do is require their existing vendors to deliver those capabilities because they want them. And in many ways, to them, that will seem like the easier way to go. You're not talking about changing systems, you're not talking about a data conversion, you're not talking about retraining everybody, you're not talking about all this mystery. You just want the system you have, but you want to be able to get it on your tablet.
Bill, this must be a big part of your universe. People want the data that you handle.
Well, it is, in just a few comments, because the first one is, obviously, we're looking for some kind of a compelling event a lot of times. Mergers and acquisitions, new people entering the market, because that goes back to that cloud-first approach that we're now seeing. That's where they're going to justify it. And I agree with Vineet, we have to do a much better job, but we're also learning too. I did one integration job where we're capturing 6,000 files every morning for an organization and passing them along, and they were getting data that they weren't getting ever before. So it was, but that wasn't the justification. They justified it because they could get rid of their FedEx charges. They didn't have to stuff the pack, and all of a sudden they had a $350,000 savings that paid for the whole thing and gave them a great return. So I think we're learning and maturing as well. So but we can definitely do a better job.
And this goes back to that ROI statement. It's not only the obvious savings or benefits, but other things can be discovered, like the diminished courier charges.
Oh, absolutely.
All right. Rick, did you have a point?
Well, I was just going to say two things on that. Vineet, I think you hit on a good point. Gail's been working with a member of our team where we looked at some of the companies, the larger groups that we were focusing on, and the challenge was, don't talk anything about the technology, but customize the way that we can deliver a message that convinces them they need to talk to us. What is it going to allow them to do? How will it support their specific priorities and strategies more effectively than any other solution? And never mention the technology. That's just behind the scenes. So I agree. And Scott, to your point, I agree, and I really think there's a simple solution. If all of you would just buy from us, then it would be very easy across all applications.
Nice try. Another
Can't
question from
overtry.
the audience?
In the discussion, I think in the presentation, there's a couple of things that I don't think was really kind of mentioned too much, and just wanted to get your thoughts, because I think it's a big part of the cloud is the whole concept of disaster recovery and compliance. There was a couple of bullet points, but I don't think there was enough emphasis in terms of what this brings, because typically on property, it's a local IT staff. We don't even hear about it, and so they will recover to their best of their capabilities, whereas in a cloud environment, there's a different plateau and expectation of service levels that be interesting to see the service levels of our hotel in Kuantan, for example, in terms of what is being provided. What are your thoughts in this area? And what does the cloud give that an on-property environment may not provide?
Let's start with Frank on that one.
Well, I think in many cases, it goes back to some of the concepts that have been discussed in terms of economies of scale. You're able to bring more to the table in terms of technology, in terms of high availability, in terms of redundancy of your data and of servers and all of those types of things, which there's been so much, so many advances in virtualization and the database technology in terms of high availability that may not be cost effective at the property level, but if you're splitting that cost across multiple properties, you're able to actually deliver much higher availability. As you saw the trend with SkyTouch, they were able to achieve higher and higher levels of availability, again, because of that maturity of the technology, both the vendors they're probably dealing with, along with their own expertise, and that continues to evolve. So I think there is that part of it that you're going to have be able to put in place more enterprise class types of solutions that will deliver that high availability and disaster recovery plans that can be put in place to really have as close to 100% or at least 5.9 reliability, which we all like to achieve. So I think that's just one of the benefits of going to cloud technologies, the economy of scale and the ability to take advantage of more enterprise class technology.
Other comments?
Well, I look at disaster recovery and how seriously hotels do or do not take that entire concept. I think disaster recovery is a lot like insurance. It's a nuisance. You don't like writing those monthly checks until you actually have a disaster and you are glad that you did it. Well, the longer somebody goes out of disaster, the more complacent they get in keeping up their appropriate policies. So if you look at a local hotel, oftentimes they're not following the appropriate data backup schedules. If they are doing that, then they're not taking that data off-site. The redundancy in the hardware, if you have a hardware failure, is often pretty expensive for the hotel to deal with. And so a lot of it is just out of sight, out of mind until that disaster hits. So this is certainly a benefit of moving that above property, and you're putting that in the hands of IT professionals who do this for a living and understand the importance of disaster recovery. And really, the most difficult part of disaster recovery comes down to the data. If you have a disaster at the hotel, a flood or a hurricane or something like that, where the physical plant at the hotel is really struggling, you lost electricity, you've now lost access to the data. And even if you had the backups, without the electricity, you're not going to get it. But with an above property solution in the cloud, the data center is far away from that local event and the system's up and running. So the hotel could theoretically continue to manage their operations with a wireless hotspot and a tablet and continue to have some access to their data to be able to look at emergency reports, to look at in-house guests, and be able to provide their guests that needed service. It's just not possible in an on-premise scenario.
Bill, let me ask you a question, just continuing on the same theme. You in your presentation talked about the pluses of the cloud and then some of the cons. And you said the first of the cons was security, and that now is largely the responsibility of the vendor. There was a time when cloud operators would say, trust us. We won't do SLAs, and we have no liability. And that made a lot of brands uneasy. Has that situation improved? Not the reliability, but the responsibility.
Well, I still say it, but no. You know what? The hoteliers have gotten much more sophisticated. I can tell you in the last year, if I get an RFP from a hosting perspective, it includes the SSAE certifications, it includes the ISO 27001, 144 controls. But when we go back to cost to benefit too, we do have to realize I have a lot of hoteliers that are still working off the server in the back room and on top of a box. And then they come in and they want low hosting costs, but they want the clauses in the agreements to cover this. I think it's gotten to the point where from a maturity standpoint, I don't know a cloud provider that doesn't have disaster recovery. One of the things I struggle with is if I tell you my disaster recovery, then I've just ruined it, now I gotta go rebuild it type thing. But I think from a maturity perspective, we're seeing that on both sides of the fence. The proposals now are coming in with 30, 40, 50 pages of worksheets of exactly how are you handling that. So I do think we are getting over it.
Okay. Alex, does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay, thank you. Gentlemen, another question?
Along the same thing, John. Rick, it seems that, Bill talked about security, integration, and governance. Obviously, you solved that. So how were you able to do that? Was it just the fact that you started in the cloud? And then, I know you're incredibly happy about this. Why haven't any of your competitors been able to accomplish that as well? Certainly we know our opinion, but I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say.
Larry made it happen.
Look, sure, if you're talking about solving the security problem, there's many facets of security, but our focus has been on just getting the IT footprint at the hotel as small as possible, so there's less things to worry about from the hotel's perspective. So at the end of the day, they just have an internet-capable device running a browser. The security now is pushed completely up into our hands, and there's nothing at the hotel really that is has sensitivity with security. They have the user ID and password like you would on any kind of a private website that they log in. Once they're in the system, they're interacting with it, but all of that security is now behind the firewall of the solution that's up in the cloud. There's nothing at the hotel. There is a small footprint in most locations where you're still dealing with on-premise systems like a TV system or point-of-sale system, and that's something that as these other vendors start moving away from serial-based connections and understand the internet and IP protocols more, then they can talk directly to the above property solution, not having to have a software footprint that does that translation on their behalf.
I would just say I'm the least technical person in the room, but one of the things we also realized is getting really good at that in one environment doesn't mean you are ready to be good at that in another. And my example is we were originally hosting a client in their own private data center. We then moved to a hosted data center, and actually everything translated very well there. When we moved into first public cloud, we really struggled to achieve the same level of security and compliance that we felt we needed to have, because even though that service provider was saying trust us, we weren't seeing what we needed to see. So we actually made the move to a private cloud environment to be able to achieve what we needed. And so I think it really takes a lot of diligence to stay on top of, set your standards, how things have to work, and then you have to choose and manage the vendor to be able to provide what's necessary.
Richard, did that answer? Thank you. Scott?
Just a follow-up question on that. It's really hard for really for anybody, but for hoteliers to judge the extent to which you are actually following the security practices that you espouse. There's really no reasonable way that they can judge that. So generally, they may ask for all of those things in the agreement, but they're still trusting that you're saying you're doing those things, and they have very little in the way of being able to demonstrate that you're not doing those things. So it's not a great protection for them. So the question is, are you indemnifying them? Because you're taking on the role of their agent, storing their data. So are you indemnifying them against the loss of information? Are you indemnifying them against the financial risk associated with the exposure of sensitive information? Because I think that's really the thing that they'd be looking for.
Let's start with you, Bill. Indemnification?
Well, we are, and we're insuring it. I mean, now the big thing is cyber insurance. But, one of the challenges that we have, like with the financial data, is cyber insurance wants to go with personal data, not necessarily just financial data. So we are looking at indemnification. But the other side is we're also this was the governance side. To me, this is what's going to come after integration, that I don't want you to tell me that step was done. I want you to show me that step was done with my audit trail. I want the green light, and so I don't have to ask anymore.
Bill, before we look to other people for an answer to that, tell me what you mean by governance and the governance trail.
Well, governance to me is management, oversight, and administration, because as we move to the cloud, obviously that's outside of our firewall. It's outside of our oversight. The idea is it's external to us in total. So to me, when I talk about governance, I want to know where I got data, how it was, produced, that it wasn't manipulated, and the fact that I then received it and I consumed it the way I expect to in a secure, secure manner.
All right.
So to me, governance is really oversight and administration.
All right, thank you. Rick, indemnification.
Well, I think two things, though. To Scott's point, while it is somewhat difficult to prove some of these things, we do follow PCI compliance audit processes so that we can, at least for that point in time, be able to say we were audited, we actually would do all these things that we say we do and to what level. And in terms of indemnification, we have differing levels depending on, much like SLAs, it's what does the partner really look for, and we certainly are confident in our ability, so that's something that we negotiate to the point that that person feels like they need it, but we're very confident about the position that we have.
All right, Frank.
Yeah, I'd probably, on both fronts. I mean, in terms of PCI compliance and all of those measures, obviously, most vendors, I would say, especially ones that deal with that kind of data, certainly have to have those in place. But for us, we're not your traditional sort of cloud vendor in the sense of, we're now basically taking your data. We're working with you and essentially working with your data center and effectively providing those, going above property, but not taking it above property into our own data center.
So you're
It's
not
really working
hosting
with you. What's that?
So you're not hosting.
Not
those.
hosting.
Yeah, I understand.
And you're not using public cloud. All right.
Not internally. We use
Microphone?
public cloud services. Sorry, we use public cloud services, but
Okay.
we don't host them internally. So.
All right. Are you getting the level of confidence from those public cloud services that you're looking for? When people talk to you about indemnification, can you stand confidently knowing these people are behind you?
Yeah, and in many cases, they're contracting with them as well.
All right.
Or there's a relationship with them. We can provide the language, and it varies depending on the provider. Let's say it's a marketing automation provider. It may vary in terms of what they'll provide, but we certainly limit the kind of information that would go to those providers anyway. So I think it has to be, it's a case by case. When you talk about indemnification, it's that, as Rick said, it's a comfort level of sitting down and figuring out what's going to make sense for both organizations or potentially multiple vendors and organizations in order to come up to a degree of indemnification that feels right.
So to pick up Bill's term, you're applying a level of governance yourself within the organization to add the security. Okay. And Rick, you had another?
I was just going to say, I think it's probably fairly obvious, but we're stating, we also make a point to remind the property that they have a level of responsibility as well. When the data comes through to us, we've got it. But there's the control over the data that they need to make sure that they have policies and practices in place. And so we do try to make that part of the process as well.
Okay, thank you. Next question.
In terms of globalization, to Vineet's question, I noticed Mexico is one of the countries that have been installed. Could you explain a little bit about the process to deploy in that country, and especially any localization for VAT and that necessitated software changes? How did that get released? Because you're in a hosted model, so those releases are not to the benefit of your existing customers, but you needed it to go to Mexico.
Yeah, it's not just Mexico. I mean, we see a lot of that similarity, Australasia, Europe, and then within Europe you see all this almost balkanization of tax policy and what's required, even though it's the EU, what you have to do in Italy and in Spain, different than what you have to do in the UK and France, and then we found in Germany a little bit different as well. So we've invested in the product to be able to support all of those different options. Globalization isn't just making sure the screens appear correctly and in languages that users can understand, but also, in the case of Mexico and the requirement they implemented not long ago, last year I believe, to require the electronic factura. So we partnered with a vendor that worked with us down there to be able to provide that, and we worked with them to exchange that information and to be able to support that and be compliant. Now, as far as our installations go, in Mexico, we do both remote installations and we have folks that can go on site and do those as well.
But is that the same hosted application? So
Yeah.
it's applicable to the total install base?
Yeah, we have our hosting is done in the United States for all of our implementations.
I might have to explain how we allow them to buy property by user to make those changes.
Yeah, absolutely. So our solution really is based on the user's expectations as well as the property's needs. So each property, of course, is configured uniquely. So that's where we set up VAT or TVA or GST, PST, all those various tax options. That's really hotel driven. But well, I don't know if it's unique, but one of the things I think is cool about what we do is when I, as a super user, I can log into the hotel in France and I'm able to actually see what's going on, see the data in an application that's in English for me. But that same user in France is seeing that in French because it's based on that user's locale, using standard localization tools to be able to know what does that user need to see, even though the data is consistent across the platform. Of course, things like transaction codes, we translate, so I could see them in English here, but if I had a Spanish-speaking guest, I can create a bill for them in Spanish. So the data itself is what it is, but everything around that data can be configured for each country.
Does that make the release management, especially the scalability aspect of when you have a new version release, what changed? From a consumer standpoint, we know how to have an on-property server and a hosted. From a vendor perspective, what changed in terms of being able to release the on-property version? And I'm not sure whether you have one, but certainly for a hosted environment, your world got a lot more complicated.
Charlie, then Frank.
Our world did get more complicated. But we have a unique device that we use every time we have a new release where we can put out supportability documentation in language for the countries we operate in, as well as ensuring that we've correctly translated any new fields or labels that we have added. So that's a process that we've built in-house to be able to accommodate that.
Thank you. Frank.
Well, and one thing we pride ourselves, I mean, it comes down to good software design, right? One thing we pride ourselves on is we have one version of Resort Suite. I mean, there's obviously releases, but any user that's on version 6.0 of Resort Suite has exactly the same software. Now it could be configured differently. So in the UK, when they have VAT, the screens for booking a reservation all come up VAT inclusive versus, you know, showing it in a, so it just comes down to, even though we may add options because of some localization, some tax, you know, some tax device that we have to support or whatever, that's transparent to users that are in a different jurisdiction because we just don't have those configuration options set. So it just comes down to configuration versus having customized versions of your software scattered around the world. So that's just, I think it comes down to just good software design so that you're not supporting all these different flavors of your system, because that eventually becomes unsustainable. So it's, you know, it's just manage it through options and be able to support, you know, the various intricacies that differentiate different countries or jurisdictions.
Bill, you had a comment?
Pet versus herd. Obviously, when you guys are looking at the vendor, you don't want to be cut out because of this. I mean, from my perspective, because I host multiple applications, Mexico's pretty easy. I mean, there might be a different Spanish, you know, if you're in Spain than in Mexico from a usage perspective, but a lot of the vendors are now coming out with Unicode so that they can run multiple languages and not have the limitations that they had years ago. But when we go into places like Russia, where all of a sudden it's not just my application, but like for accounting, I need cash desk. Well, you don't buy that anywhere but Russia, and it's not running in the cloud, it's running locally. I mean, these are all the things that you really do have to take into consideration.
Right.
Thank you. Mark.
Yeah, I just had a question that when you roll out a new version of the software, how are you actually training the staff on the new features of the enhanced software?
So
Start with you, Frank.
One of the things we do when we release a new version, we'll have we use a cloud-based product called Zendesk to do all of our customer care, and on there we'll post all of our release notes and we'll post videos. So not every single feature will have a training video, but many of them will, especially ones that are a little more material. We'll put a lot of that there, and instead of trying to email every user, they could set up their customer care so that they get notifications if we're posting things. And in a lot of ways, it just gets much better communication, and you can push that information out, to those users very quickly, so that and we could do it ahead of time before they even receive an update. And in many cases, depending on the organization we're working with, we'll actually install the update on their servers prior to putting it into production. So there'll almost be a test acceptance environment and then a production, so that their core users management team can actually go through some of the changes that have been made prior to then putting it into production. So it's just about what processes you have internally to make that happen.
Anyone else?
So we recently changed the entire look and feel for about a little over 5,000 of our properties, and we did it in a night. So that's a challenge. When Facebook does that, they don't get very good reviews. So we worked with marketing to do a lot of lead up. We did special videos, before and afters, guiding them through processes. In a normal release cycle, we do release to everybody at the same time, and we do pre-announcements. We ensure that we have X number of days prior to a release. And when we have these special things, it probably doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that if you change the entire look and feel, you're going to have to let people know ahead of time. And so we did that, and we had a very successful release, actually. We didn't get nearly the negative feedback that we got from Facebook. In fact, that Facebook got. And in fact, some of our first tweets, I'm really into technology. Some of our first tweets I ever saw natively were people raving about how much they enjoyed it. But I think it really comes down to good software design. One of our tenets is to make sure that we're doing things that fit in the flow. So when we add a feature, it just, I can now do that. If I don't need to do it, no problem. So we're very cognizant of that from the moment that we decide to go and do something, that we want to make sure we're really adding to the process, but not getting in anybody's way. For us, this is a tool. You learned how to use a screwdriver when you were this tall, and we want to keep it that way. So when you learned how to use a flathead, you didn't have to get new instruction on how to use a Phillips. You just knew. And that's what we try to do as we add new features through the system.
Okay, thank you. Bill, did you have a comment as well? I saw you shaking your head in terms of rollout.
No, I was just agreeing.
Oh, all right, fair enough. Mark, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, it does make me smile when you say you've done 5,000 hotels. I just wondered how busy your help desk was the following day.
Well, with any release, there's some activity on the help desk. And I'm not going to lie, we certainly made sure that the help desk had ample support, and we were able to do that. But frankly, it really wasn't as ugly as I expected, in all frankness. I was expecting them to be wanting to shoot me, and they didn't. It was slightly more than any normal release we would have gotten.
I'm going to make everyone unhappy here by saying that what I've heard described strikes me as a reasonably passive way of new releases and release management. I wonder if there's an appetite amongst hoteliers for capabilities within the software to log who's looked at these new release notes, who has viewed the video. If the appropriate people haven't viewed the video, a message automatically goes to the controller or the GM or the owner or whoever. So there's an escalation as the implementation date approaches, that critical new facilities, that changes have been reviewed and accepted. Do vendors need to be more active, if you will, in their facilities for managing those releases? Mark?
Yeah, I definitely think so. That would be a great way of recording employee training, making sure that everybody's up to speed, knew what the features were. And if it's something you guys could maintain and then have an escalation path if people haven't been on that training, that would be really a good enhancement to service, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I think, one of the things that we use a video product that actually allows you to give users actual access, and you can track that they've actually viewed the video, how much they viewed, if they just kind of skip through it.
Okay.
And then there are testing tools, and we haven't enabled all of these features, but I could totally see that this is something that we've talked about internally, about being able to provide, if there's a complaint, we can say, well, your users really are just 55% competence level in terms of their testing, so we need to get them through all this training in order to get there. But I think that's one of those things where I think you need to work together with your hotelier partners in order to really, because that's not something that vendors can, without at great expense, and in many cases we just don't have the hoteliers saying they're willing to invest in that money, because it does take a lot to maintain that and to create all of the testing that would be required. So it would have to be something that you joint fund it if it is that important and has that much value.
Okay. Rick, you were...
Yeah, I was just going to say, and we do sort of personalize this as well. There have been times when our clients didn't want to make a release happen until after their annual convention, so that they had an opportunity to be face-to-face with the majority of their population, and we could present that, they could test it out, they could feedback. And there were times when we delayed something that we could have released weeks and weeks ahead because they just wanted to get a greater comfort level. So I think it can really be personalized based on the user group and what level of comfort they have.
I would think, especially for Resort Suite and SkyTouch, and possibly for your organization too, Bill, that you may, as you're growing your suite, your capabilities, there may be areas that you encounter and you say, this system at this time and place should not be taken into the cloud. Are there, in fact, systems within the hotel environment that need to be on premises for the time being? We'll start. Bill, do you want to take that first?
It's a great, because I come from a different scenario in back office, because to me in back office, if we change the screen from red to blue, everybody for some reason doesn't know how to put in an AP invoice anymore. And from a PMS perspective, it's a much thinner product that doesn't have as many touch points. So to me, cloud is not just about software as a service, and it's not just about multi-tenancy. I mean, to me, cloud is a great infrastructure to leverage. And you should be able to take your legacy system up. But that doesn't mean, from an accounting perspective, that we want to upgrade versions every year if that version rollout is going to be 500 properties at a cost of $5 million in training. So to me, this is just proper alignment. Mm-hmm. I would say yes, always to cloud. I think it's the way to go from a process and a centralization standpoint, but I'm not sure that multi-tenant cloud or software as a service is always the answer.
All right, interesting. Rick, what's the SkyTouch perspective?
Well, I think there's certainly some applications that aren't ready to move to the cloud, but I don't think that we should consider any of them as they couldn't over time get there. But I do think that they shouldn't go before they're ready, because the level of security that's required with the data that we handle in this industry is too critical. So there's a number of things that we interface with in a non-cloud-based environment on property, because that's where those vendors are at this time, and we're anxious to work with them to bring it up into the cloud whenever they're ready.
Any specifics of those that are not ready for prime time?
Well, we have 150 plus on-property interfaces that we have to work with in that environment.
Okay, so there's a fair list there.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that just has to do with the level of investment required to change those systems out. As a vendor, we don't want to come in and force you to change out your PBX, which is working fine and hasn't made you a dime in a long time. So that's a big reason we continue to support all of these legacy systems. And with our client base, they can get used systems, which is even furthering the lifespan of us needing to continue to support the backwards compatibility.
Okay. Frank, are you seeing systems that are in the not quite ready yet category?
Well, I think and it's been said, I mean, there are legacy systems in place that, you need to integrate with. Most hotels are just not going to rip them out if they're working. In many cases, they're going to stay there. But there are solutions. We use a product called Lodging Link by Comptrol when we act as the PMS, which supports over 600 hospitality-based interfaces and has serial connections, but then it has an IP connection. So if we're running above property, we can integrate with that one device. It can connect to all the legacy call accounting systems and everything else that may still sit on property. But a lot of those systems you're seeing now with cloud-based offerings as well. So I don't think there's necessarily a category of product or service that can't be above property. But again, it comes down to aligning your overall strategy so that you're delivering a guest experience that's not siloed. That, to me, it still overrides anything about cloud or not cloud.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Mark?
So on that basis, do we ever think that a building management system will be put above property?
Do you mean just asset management? Keeping
No, effectively running the boilers, that sort of running the aircon, that sort of thing. A building management system in that process.
So HVAC?
Yeah,
Okay. Now, that's something most of us don't even think about in the property management side. But you see a big plus there.
Yeah, well, I just think that's one of the systems that's going to be legacy that will stay on property forever. I cannot see any reason for moving it or anyone ever wanting to move that system. Now most of those systems are IP, but you just don't want to move it away from the property because when that connection goes, for whatever reason, for those 5 hours, 6 hours a year, you're going to be in real trouble. And that's the system I see that will stay there.
Richard, a similar feeling at Omni?
Yeah, I agree with what Mark just said on that.
Okay. And Scott, you had a question?
I was
A
just
point?
going to say, I sort of feel the same way about key lock systems.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so
Go.
I'll be the contrarian here.
All right.
But I can do that because I am not limited by what technology can do, but what I wanted to do. But this weekend I just bought the Nest thermostat. So I can control my house temperature from anywhere. I can see what's going on there. I can monitor what's happening. I can see the smoke alarms and what's happening there. You can control your door entry. So we may not be there yet, but I don't see any reason why we couldn't and shouldn't be eventually. I think the one that scares me the most is what Scott referenced, and that's the key lock system, because we have such tremendous hackers in the world. And when you're talking about somebody can get into my room, that to me is a different story, and I want to see a lot of security before we get there. But some of these other things, and we've had some vendors that are into what I consider asset management, facilities management, who have begun to take more of their work up into the cloud and have reached out to us to say, look, with your installed base, we really want to work with you, that when we come to the cloud, we want to work with you to do that. So I see them actually making that move.
Okay. Thank you.
Just to follow up,
Yep.
I mean, that's why I feel that way about the room key system, because if you think about it, the way to really secure a system is to disconnect it from the network so that nobody can, and lock it in a room so nobody can get at it. And to a certain extent, you want the room access system as disconnected from the network as it can possibly be. So the more you raise it up to a cloud solution, the more you give people access to it through a cloud solution, the more you're connecting it to the network. And that's just why I see it. It's maybe something that's always a legacy solution out there.
And as the gadget guy, I can open and close my car and start it remotely. I'm not going to put that on my house. Not anytime soon.
Bill?
Well, I just read that NSA is now working on a program that's going to break any encryption, so makes us all worry a little bit.
We've been talking about the cloud, and that makes me think of integration and greater data access and therefore the ability to do more, learn more, do more. Bill, I'm wondering, and I'll ask each one of the vendor organizations this, but you first, if in rolling out capabilities to new clients, if there have been aha moments for them, if they have seen something as they've transitioned to your platform and to your environment, that they've encountered something new that they hadn't expected to see, hadn't seen before, a real plus for them.
I think I don't know if it's a plus or a negative, but the biggest aha moment when we get people onto our platform is, oh, we've been looking at this data for 3 years. We thought it was correct, but it doesn't tie into our accounting system type thing. So that's been the biggest aha moment. I also think the other side is many of our customers feel that they can leverage the same methodologies for integration that they do on premise in the cloud. And I think that's the scary moment. And again, it's the number one reason people come back from the cloud, because all of a sudden they're made to go through one portal, if you will, one API.
Yep.
And so to me, that is proper planning on everybody's part to make sure, because from a sales perspective, everybody wants to make it seem easy, and it's just not always that easy.
All right. Rick, I've got to believe one of the ahas is for your general managers and owners who suddenly have this anytime, anywhere access. Are there others, or would you want to highlight that as something that the cloud really brings home to these people that they haven't had before?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the biggest aha was the freedom that being in the cloud and being available everywhere was. But with that came another aha that wasn't so great. That freedom needed to be limited. You know, it's one thing to have access at the GM level or the owner level or the supervisor level from wherever, but your night auditor and your front desk clerk and your bellman didn't need that access. And so we learned that we certainly needed to be able to control that at a different level that I don't think initially was as big a concern.
Okay.
And so that's certainly something that, not a great aha, but certainly one to keep in mind as you move forward in this, is being available everywhere is great as long as you have the right access controls in place to be able to do that.
Available everywhere, but available to whom? Yes. Frank, you've got a sophisticated suite of capabilities out there. It must offer some interesting opportunities for people. Have there been ones that surprised and delighted?
I think the key is surprising and delighting your guest.
Mm-hmm.
I think when the guest, first of all, you know, we've been in an industry of, you know, what happens behind closed doors to make it all work, you know, we'll deal with it. And now, as the guest is demanding more and more capabilities and self-control of their experience, I think as you know, our customers are seeing the ability for their guests now through cloud services, through mobile type of capabilities and online capabilities, and able to really self-direct their experience. And the hoteliers realizing that they can put all of the controls in place that they had when someone's managing it, but all of a sudden realize that they're now making money at 2 in the morning and 3 in the morning as guests are, you know, logging in when they have access. And it could be, I've come out of a meeting and I want to see, you know, can I book a yoga class for this afternoon or whatever it is. They're seeing by actually giving that control to their customers, with also putting the controls in place behind the scenes to make sure you're revenue managing and only giving the proper inventory as you see fit.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually created tremendous both revenue generation opportunities as well as the guest experience is enhanced exponentially. So that's the aha. I think the aha ends up with your guest, which is where you really want it to be.
All right, sounds good. Vineet.
Okay, so on a slightly different topic to do with the cloud, about governance and the role of IT. Because one of the challenges one has with all the cloud vendors which are out there is it's made it easier for functional or business groups to go and get what they want, right? So which is in direct conflict with IT, because there is a loss of control, right? Which is good and bad. So what are you guys seeing is what is the role of IT in the future? Because and this is corporate IT, right? So people like myself or other CIOs, what do you see as their role in the future? Because this obviously creates a conflict point. It is, how do you govern this environment where each business area has the ability to manage their own environment.
We'll start. Frank?
Sure. So I think ultimately it comes down to being able to develop a overall strategy for the organization with respect to IT, so that you can come forward where you bring all the stakeholders together and you're deciding at a high level of really focusing on the overall strategy and the guest experience, and so developing that strategy together, so that when you go to the vendor community, you are going with that holistic view of the guest experience. You're not buying your solutions, on a department by department level because, this spa director used this product that they're comfortable with, and this person had used it at another property for this particular area. But you're looking at it as a whole. And I have to say, what Richard's team did in terms of putting that together and bringing all of the stakeholders to the table, in terms of IT, in terms of all of their functional business areas, it was a joint decision. And they made sure it was a joint decision, and we didn't move forward until it was a joint decision. And that then everyone is aligned. It isn't that it's being forced down their throats by IT, but if you sit down and develop a holistic strategy around the guest experience and all of the solutions that are going to become part of that, and I'm not saying it has to be a one vendor solution, I'm saying you look at it as a whole, and sometimes that isn't feasible. You may require it to replace just one individual system, but ensuring that fits your long-term strategy, that's jointly developed by IT with obviously your business stakeholders as well.
Other comments on that?
Well, I tend to look at it as, from an IT standpoint, I think the role is to enable the business to do what it needs to do. I do look for the folks on our team to also have responsibility for advising us. You may be able to do it, but it doesn't mean you should. And so we really look for that balance where in most any cases, what my challenge to people is, I don't want to hear that it can't be done. I want to hear what it would take and what are the implications, and then we can make informed decisions. And that's where I think these guys have both pushed me back a little bit over time at when I was really pushing for something, because I would think, well, certainly that can be done. And the answer eventually would come out, well, yes, it could, but here would be the implications. And I think the example that Charlie gave, we can give anyone access anywhere to a hotel, but do you want to do that? Or do you want to limit that if I'm a certain title, I have to be on property and log in? And so ability versus responsibility, and I think there is a responsibility, kind of Larry mentioned earlier, at the property level, it's kind of out of sight, out of mind, thinking about a security standpoint and what you can and can't do. And I think that's true for business people in general. They just want to achieve some goal, and I think it's up to the IT group to be able to help people understand that just because you can, maybe you shouldn't.
I wonder if Vineet's question raises a further question about IT as the group that says no. I look and I say to myself, are we replacing a closet full of servers with a closet full of clouds, none of which talk to each other? Sometimes they bump into each other and maybe they explode. It wouldn't be very pretty. But it leads me to think of the Infor relationship that you have, Bill, and there's more of a single throat to choke. I wonder on both sides of this discussion whether there's an argument for a general contractor or a super contractor that keeps all the clouds together for a hotel company, whether we run the danger of too many clouds. Who'd like to start on that?
I'd like to, because to me, I mean, the documented changes from technology to information. I mean, CTOs to CIOs, and the fact that everybody's getting so much data right now that they don't really know what to do with it. So to me, that's the documented side. But the role still exists of, just because it's not technology within your servers doesn't mean you don't want to understand the technology across your ecosystem. And that's where I think a lot of the hoteliers kind of fall down. They don't actually go out to see what technology is being used. Is it really going to provide the mobile and the social and the nexus of forces, capabilities that they're going to require into the future?
Any other comments on that closet full of clouds, Frank?
Well, I think the hoteliers need to ask their vendors to come forward with, having them come to the table with their vendors together
Uh-huh.
to sort of say, you know, SkyTouch and Resort Suite, we really like, you know, your capabilities here and yours on the PMS side. You know, come to us with a solution. Don't come to us with individual technologies.
Mhm.
And so then it becomes, you know, our responsibility to work together to then come forward and say, here's what we can deliver. And it's an integrated solution because, as Bill said earlier, you know, integration in the cloud is exponentially harder than integration at the property level, because you can always go down to, okay, well, we'll just access the data from those tables or from this or there. But when you get to the cloud, it really has to be well thought out, and it has to be secure. It has to be reliable. It has to work. It has a certain level of performance and response. And so all of those things are important, and you need vendors to come together to provide a solution. It doesn't necessarily have to be one vendor, but if the vendors are going to work together, then it's a win-win-win. I think it's all of the vendors together along with with the hotelier.
All right, Scott, I saw you nodding your head.
Yeah, I was agreeing with everything you had to say. I think there's a tendency to think that there is something magical happening here, and I just want to throw a little water on that and say there's nothing magical happening here. There's a reason there has been a 20 or 30 year effort in this industry to try to figure out how to get systems to talk to each other, and that's because it's hard. And the fact that you can buy software as a service from one solution provider and then buy software as a service from another solution provider does not make it easier for those two solutions to be integrated. And so maybe they already have, and so you can leverage some of that. But in many ways, the problem is, I was going to say it isn't any different, but it is different. It's harder. Mm-hmm. It's harder because you're exercising less control over the solutions. And so I think in that environment, it's a mistake to think, and I really don't think I'm being self-serving in saying this, but it's a mistake for the business to think, I can just buy this from them and this from them and this from them and put it together. Everything's going to work great. I can run my business on that. All of the work is not in connecting the wires. The work is in understanding the business data model and how it operates and what it means. And that's where all the work and integration happens. And I still think there's a big need for that.
I go further and say the real value is in
Yes.
going that step beyond.
Yes.
All right, we're at a point in time where we need to address our final question. And we're going to start with Bill, and then we'll do Rick, and then we'll finish with Frank. The question is this: as we end this discussion, what are the key messages about your company and this topic that you hope hoteliers will take away from this discussion? Key messages. Bill?
Well, I think from our point is that the cloud is here. We're now mature enough, I feel, that we're seeing fast adoption, and there's planning that needs to take place on everybody's part. But the idea is that the tools and the methodologies are established, and I think the security is now pretty much set, and I think that this can offer a lot of efficiencies and cost savings for you if you look at it effectively, both for new applications and legacy applications.
Thank you. Rick?
I think really same for subject and about SkyTouch. We came into the marketplace introducing the SkyTouch Hotel OS, and I think it speaks to a little bit of what I've just been hearing in this last set of questions is we see a need in the industry for people that are going to step up and take ownership of that level of integration that takes the responsibility for that away from the end user. The end user should just say, I need these capabilities, I want to have a single login, I want to have these simple user interface, and make it happen. And as Scott said, that's way harder to do than it is to say. But that's how we're coming into the marketplace, that's what we're tackling, and I think that should be the expectation. Cloud, to me, is not a strategy, it's a way of delivering on strategies. And so we're here trying to figure out what are those things that are most important to the industry. We don't believe that no matter what we pulled together as a single integrated component of the OS, that we would have everything everyone needed, so we would continue to have interfaces. It wouldn't be as deep a level of integration, but it should still be up to us to ensure that what you get out of that work between two different systems is what you need. And I just think that's an expectation that we have to have, and The cloud just makes that both easier and harder, but it's here.
Thank you. Frank, the last word is yours.
Do I have all 12 minutes? Yeah, I just think Rick said it really well when he said, cloud is not a strategy. I mean, I think ultimately it comes down to, looking at all of these trends. Really, we're in an unprecedented time, I think, in technology, in terms of looking at how cloud computing is impacting our ability to deliver our products and services, mobile technology, the unbelievable acceleration in mobile and the capabilities that are delivered to the end consumer, I think are going to have ramifications on this industry that have been more dramatic than anything we've ever seen. And I would even go beyond that with tablets. I think it's not necessarily that we have to change out all of our workstations and all of those, but the ability over time to create more and more use cases of really limited functionality. That user, that housekeeper really just needs that slice of functionality. And we're going to see these micro apps that are deployed within a hospitality context where you're really limiting the exposure of your data, of your systems and everything else, and just giving that user just the capabilities that they require. So we're going to see, I think, a time where, one of our, as Resort Suite, one of our core strategies wasn't necessarily, we've been at this, now over 12 years since we originally designed our technology, and all of those, the business rules and all of the maturity of our software, we just felt that taking that and creating web services and then creating, tablet apps to do a lot of the functions, over time you'll see that let's say our UIs will change. It will no longer be, let's say, a workstation and even accessing, but there may be some administration that's still done on a workstation, but more and more use cases you'll find on these very cost-effective tablets. You can get a tablet computer now for less than $50, an Android tablet. It's unbelievable, the level of, with our, the app that we deployed or we released at High Tech, which was our tablet-side POS, you can take that right to the table, even if you're outside of Wi-Fi range, keep your menu there, you can take the order. The moment you get back into Wi-Fi range, it'll send it through to the kitchen. And that's using all the back-end technology that's tried and true and all works, but now you're just extending it that last mile or the last few feet to the table. But that's true point of sale. It's at the point is that you're in front of the customer, and I think that's going to revolutionize hospitality. It's just being in front of our guests, being more engaged with our guests instead of head down at a terminal. And I just think I'm excited about the future. I think that there's tremendous opportunity to create sort of the next generation of technology, and we're obviously would love to work with a lot of people in this room to realize that future.
Thank you. That concludes our session today. I'd like to express the gratitude of all of us here in the room and all of HTNG to Resort Suite, to SkyTouch Technology, and to Pass Unity. We're very appreciative of your time and the information you shared with us. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.